Hello, thanks for making it all the way to the end. Are you still alive? No? Right, quick pop question so I know who's in the room. How many of you work for a public authority? All right. I'm sorry to you guys. I might scare you a little bit. Part of my brief was what I'm going to talk about is, can we contextualize it somewhere in the area which is the boundary between the state and the citizen. So I'm going to try to do that, but given that you're not all public servants, I'll try to be a little bit flexible on that. So, hi, I'm Esko. I'm from this Satori Lab. Satori is a Japanese word which means the experience of seeing your true nature. So in some sense, I think what we're trying to do is create experiences that allow you to see your true nature, much like Ugo did earlier on in his presentation and allowed me to see my true nature as a kind of a landfill contributor. If I say anything particularly amazing, please tweet it to the Satori Lab. If I say anything particularly spurious, please aim it directly at me. That's my Twitter handle. And I won't go into a big biography, but the point is that what these different things I've done in my life reflect is that I've spent roughly 50% of my professional life in soul-crushing command and control bureaucracies, and the other 50% of my working life in the arts and the hackery disciplines and wonderful fields of freedom where anything is possible. So I kind of bridge those gaps. And I am going to try to say some blasphemous sounding things because I think if we're looking towards the future, somehow in those statements are the source of the truths that are going to emerge. Somebody showed a picture of a mobile phone from like the 80s, I think it was. Let's do a mental exercise. Can you remember the phone that you carried in your hand in the middle 90s, 1995? Probably like a Nokia or Ericsson, and it could make phone calls and it could do a text message. Yeah. Imagine if then, in 1995, I had told you, in the near future, that thing that you're holding in your hand, or its equivalent, you'll be able to, anywhere in the world, not knowing where you are, plug in a map coordinate, and it will know where you are, and it'll give you turn-by-turn navigation directions to this place you've never been to before. When you were holding that thing in 1995, you just said, likely, whatever, never going to happen. And yet, here we are. So what is a paradigm shift? Essentially, it's a vision of reality that we kind of built our communities and our practice and our lives over. Another way, by the way, if you can take pictures, feel free. Everything here is Creative Commons, and at the link, at the end of the presentation, there will be a link that you can go to and get all of these slides, so you don't have to take notes and pictures if you want, but you can. Yeah, it's kind of like a vision of the way that we organize things, and maybe it's more useful to think of it in terms of modes of productions. How has humanity evolved over time? So we used to be hunters and gatherers, and the salient point is that a technology comes along which kind of propels us into a new mode. So the plow, we figured out the plow, and then we became agrarian societies. And then we figured out steam engines, and we became an industrial society. And then silicon came along, and we became an information society. And then the internet came along. That's the most recent, super meaningful, evolutionary leap forward technology that we have. It's also worth mentioning that the technology usually leads, and how we follow up with the kind of the sociology, legal, cultural, environmental, political, have a little bit of a lag behind, right? Another point worth mentioning is the pace at which this happens. From chopping stuff with stone axes to, I've got a plow, I'm going to be a farmer, we're like tens of thousands of years. Then to the steam engine, thousands of years, centuries to the silicon, decades to the internet, years. So the point is that change is no longer a thing that you kind of try to forecast on the horizon and prepare yourself and then adapt to when it comes. It's a constant state, right? And we've probably got half a dozen candidates for what is going to be the next technology that leaps us forward right now. Some people are saying it's the blockchain, right? Has anybody heard of the blockchain? Yeah? Do you believe that it might be the next leap forward, or do you think it's mathematics and magic? Right. How about any of these? quantum computing. We can take a really hard problem, we can distribute it into alternative universes, and then take a snapshot of the solution, and essentially you can solve a problem very quickly that would take a normal computer until the heat death of end of the universe to do, once we get it right. Optogenetics, anybody heard of this? This essentially is wireless medicine. I'm having an epileptic seizure, and I get my phone app out, and I say, can you please fire specifically the wrong firing neurons and stop my seizure? Doof. This has been done in the lab now, right? It's not consumer level technology, but we're there. Synthetic biology, let me reprogram those evil leukemia cells so that they go and do something useful in my body, right? Coding on at the cellular level. Graphene, we're near Manchester, everybody must know about graphene, wonder material. Artificial intelligence, blockchain. All of these things have some kind of like proven concept in a lab stage, and because the pace of change is so much faster, some of these are going to start becoming, well, D-Wave is selling you a quantum computer. Okay, if you believe in that school of thought, that's consumer level technology now, right? In the next decade, any one of these could just change everything, right? And we'll initially probably do very dumb things with it. You know, printing press comes along, let's print a lot of Bibles, right? Because that's a problem we didn't have, too many Bibles, right? It takes us time to adapt. So what we're mainly concerned with here is, I think now, is that we're currently in this transition from the information age to the connected age. And we didn't handle that transition super well because basically we replicated all of these models with a silicon-based solution on it, right? Your Microsoft Outlook inbox is essentially the kind of memo that you can have when everybody's got a PC on their table and all of the rubbish stuff that comes along with that. There's no super evolution of thought beyond that. And now we're trying to figure out, well, how can we adapt to the possibilities of the connected age, a networked environment, and how can we do a better job of making that evolutionary step rather than just recreating the information age with connections between them, right? And we always get it wrong, right? We're in the right part of the world to be talking about what happened when the industrialization arrived. And if you lived in this part of the world, there was a likelihood that at 5 years old, you went to work in a mill and you were dead by 35 because it killed you, right? Socially, we had not adapted, right? Then some people started thinking about how do we create better interfaces and processes between squishy, soft humans and really hard geared up and tough machines that have no empathy whatsoever. So this is quite important stuff, I think, right? That's the argument I'm trying to make. And the other argument I'm going to suggest is that we can't develop our new solutions using the mental models of the past, right? All modern businesses currently now, oh, that might be my next slide, actually. All modern businesses now basically operate under a machine metaphor mental model, right? Hierarchies. It conceives of that you can do stuff by organizing it as a mechanistic process, and you've got like little components in there, like cogs and stuff. So you're reducing the human down to a cog, and if you don't function as per the protocol or the policy, then you're a defective cog, and we have to throw you out and put one that'll behave a little bit better in there. I think I've lost a slide somewhere there. Yeah. I think the challenge now is the environment that we work in is hyper-connected now. That's just a fact of the internet. And I can ask you as a consumer, what are your consumer expectations given the technology that you've got available? Oh, at any time of day or night, I can go to my laptop and go to Amazon and I can select an infinite range of products and I can choose the one that my friend has recommended and with a reasonable expectation that it shows up at my door within 48 hours or less if I pay more for that. Yeah? This is our default expectation and experience in a connected environment. Now let's look as consumer of public services. What does that look like? It's not exactly the same kind of smooth operation. Here's another. So what I'm going to try to do now over the next few minutes I've got remaining, yeah, I've got a bit of time, is I don't have the answer for how we do this properly, But we've been looking at this quite hard for many years now, and what we're relatively confident is that the way that you do an uncertain future properly is by building a new set of relevant principles, right? So we're looking for a new set of principles. Now, this is kind of counterintuitively hard for humans because we like to reason by analogy, right? And this has taken the VC world by storm. Oh, we need an Uber for ice cream trucks or something like that. Oh, that's investable, let's do that. Whereas if you take somebody like one of my heroes is Elon Musk, he says, that's rubbish. If I reasoned by analogy, I'd say the price of a battery is this, I want to make electric cars, therefore it's unaffordable, right? But he reasons by first principles. He says, what is the cost of the raw materials on a metals exchange needed to make a large volume of batteries? Oh, at that prices, I suddenly have options as to how I can create the necessary battery infrastructure that makes the proposition of electric cars reasonable. So we want to look for principles that are useful, and I'm not suggesting that the ones I'm going to throw up to you are the best or the only ones or kind of like we're ready for the connected age or what comes after, but they sound promising at the moment, right? So I offer them for your consideration, and if you can make use of them, then amazing. The first guy who's had a stab at this is a chap called Joey Ito. Has anybody heard of him? You have? Okay, we've got some alpha geeks in the room. He runs the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Media Lab, which is essentially a Disneyland for future-thinking engineers and geeks. And he's thrown out this 9 set of them. I won't go through them all in detail. You can read up on this stuff as well. There's a few that are worth pointing out, and some I will go into a little bit deeper. Yeah, I will read them all out, right? Resilience over strength. What we want to build is things that aren't inherently impervious to change, but are resilient to fluctuations in the environment within which they exist, yeah? So resilience is a more advantageous design criteria than pure strength, right? And if you've ever served in an army, that's a really kind of counter because we want to be strong and we want our hierarchy to be impervious to any kind of attack. Well, you should ask, what is it, the US 7th Cavalry back in the day when they tried to dismantle the Apaches? Yeah? They didn't, that was a centralized system attacking a decentralized system, and they didn't understand why every time they chopped the chief out of the situation, the system just kept getting stronger, right? Pull over push. This is a very meaningful one. This kind of also like relates to agile ways of developing things, but if you have an idea, then what you want to do is put it out into the network and pull resources in to see how far you can evolve your idea. Rather than a push mentality which says, we anointed here, for example, in this public sector institution, are going to respond to the minister's policy with our strategy document and the action plans, and we're going to push it onto officers who are then going to push it onto citizens, and then we wonder why our public services don't work. Yeah? So there's a lot of work. We've had Tom Campbell here this morning in the last speech. There was talk about service design methodologies, empathy-based tools. How do we understand what's really needed in the network and then start designing solutions which are compelling and pull people into it in some way? I think Ugo did a good job of pulling me into the idea of questioning my gadget consumption patterns. Risk over safety. Local government people really hate that one, right? They've got risk registers against anything. The point is that if you don't have some tolerance for risk, you can never innovate your way to new solutions. Safety is actually an innovation crusher. I'm not suggesting that you throw it out of the window entirely to the point where it's completely legitimate to bankrupt organizations and kill people. That's not what we're saying. But at the point that your safety consideration is so strong that you are unable to consider new ideas, then the balance is wrong on that. Practice over theory. This whole week is kind of open source hacking, hackery disciplines. It's about doing stuff and see if it works, right? In councils, when I've worked there for 10 years, I did 10 years time, I sat in meetings a lot, and we talked about things, and we never did anything, right? So you can flip that balance over. What good is a roadmap or an action plan if the designer of the roadmap was unaware of the mountain range between where you are now and the goal that you're going for, right? Or in the military terms, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. Yet this is traditional, this is born of a mental model of command and control hierarchies. We'll do a roadmap and we'll deploy the resources and we'll get our objectives done. A compass bearing is a much more useful thing. We're going that way. And if by any chance we should find a mountain range between ourselves and there, we'll figure out a way around it because we know where we're going, right? Systems over objects, I'm going to leave that one for now. Disobedience over compliance, yeah? And you work for local government, that's brilliant. Yeah. Again, that doesn't mean, you know, with wanton abandon, just kind of being a punk and breaking any rule that you can see. But compliance-based culture, kind of, they disconnect people from the true meaning of, it kind of like absolves you of responsibility to be an okay human, right? And disobedience is this idea that I don't mind working within the context of a system, but I'm periodically going to ask whether some aspect of this system is correct or not, or useful anymore, right? And if the system I'm complying in has the net byproduct of destroying the motivation of very good humans who are public, vocational sort of people, and that they leave the public service because of that, then there's something wrong with your system. And I had wished that somebody would have expressed some disobedience to kind of push those edges. Learning over education. We've had the phrase doing to rather than doing with, right? Learning is you guys just choosing to come to an event like this and explore some of the areas that you're not familiar with to see if you can build your frame of reference and start accumulating better practice. Education is when you look at your employer's training manual, and there you can go get your European driving license so you can become a better Microsoft consumer, right? So learning is what you choose to do yourself. Education is something that, and I think there's something to be said there about like the education system in general and some of its flaws. And emergence of authority, I will go a little bit into detail. So we work with organizations who are trying to adapt out of this. We're a machine model organization. All of our logic was built in the Industrial Revolution. We want to function effectively in this connected environment. I'll give you a little example of something, but the trend is that we see networks, latent networks within these bureaucracies trying to break out, because the connections within those networks, or those network connections, are more useful to the functionality or delivering on the objectives of the organization than the current organogram things. Yeah, I can see some people are going like blasphemy level going up. This is good. Right, so that's your formal hierarchy, and that's the informal resistance. And that's what's really going on within your organization. And if you only see things through this lens, then you're willfully blind to what's actually going on in your system. So we're trying to see what's going on in the systems. So this is a client that we worked with. I won't tell you who. This is kind of like social network analysis data. We asked the question, who do you work for? And you can see like the way that the arrows are pointing up. It's sort of CEO somewhere here. That's the board, actually, but it's a traditional kind of flowing up to the top kind of thing. Then we asked them, who do you work with? Right? So they work with a lot of more people than their direct manager. This is a more accurate reflection of the social dynamics going on between people in the organization. This is color-coded according to which department they work in, right? And I can tell you this particular client, one of their issues was the kind of paralysis in decision-making because complexity of structure, yeah? Here we've got an issue, but 3 people kind of own a part of it, and they're in different teams, and we have to set up a meeting, and there's a time delay, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's one of the issues they were looking at. Then we did in social network analysis, you can run like little algorithms. We did a community detection algorithm on this. Turns out there's only 4 communities, and it turns out that these 2 clusters actually, functionally, should be working really well together, but they're like socially completely segregated and stuff. So looking at it in that way, you've got an organization that suffers from complexity because it's got this, like, we need 10 silos in order to manage this beast. And actually, there's 3 communities in there. And if you just look at it that way, it makes your your organizational complexity a lot more simple, kind of thing. So that's the structure that the organization wants to be emerging out of this kind of constructed machine metaphor system it's been placed into. Algorithmic tolerances. I think this is another one which is quite important. Algorithms are going to govern all kinds of things that we do, right? That's not going away. And we're already quite far down, like worryingly far down that line. So algorithm is a set of instructions that does a thing, right, basically. It's getting to automated reasoning. Algorithms used to, crunch math things. Now they're dealing with concepts and making judgments on them. Google has a machine learning algorithm that sits watching cats all day, videos of cats all day, or YouTube videos in general, and it's looking whether there are cats in those videos or not. And they can slide the algorithm to one of 2 tolerances. Either they slide for inclusion, which says, anything which might have a cat in it, I want it tagged as being cat possible. I'll even tolerate some not cats in your results because I don't want to miss one video that might have a cat in all of YouTube. Yeah? Or you can set the slider to accuracy. I can tolerate missing a few cats. You can leave a few videos with cats, but in this list of videos that you take as having a cat, I don't want to see anything which isn't a cat. Yeah? I will not have a mistake. So you can set tolerance on this algorithm. This kind of stuff is already in use in real-world applications, and this story is not so nice. So you can't really tell, and I'm kind of glad. I'll explain to you what these pictures are. But you know the drones that fly around in bits of the hot spots of the world? They ingest vast amounts of video data, high-resolution video data. They've got 360-degree cameras. There's dozens of them flying around. It's just beyond human processing. So what happens is that a visual recognition algorithm first scans all of the visual data, and they're trained to look for particular patterns. One of the patterns that they're trained to look for is a group of cars with people hanging out the back of them holding guns, right? And that is an indication that this could be a convoy of bad guys off to do a bad thing, right? Then what happens is if it flags one of those up, it passes it on to the human operator who takes a closer look and says, kill or not kill, right? Because these drones now have missiles on them. It's a bit simplified, but that's basically the pattern. Lots of video, algorithm watches, flags things, human operator decides, do I kill, don't I kill? Yeah? Bear in mind that the human operator, who's sitting in a room and seeing tons of video, has just been passed a signal from a robot which says, I think I see something suspicious here. Right? That's anchoring a thought. So this is footage from a drone, which is targeting a bad guy's car, actually. And that is footage from the aftermath of a wedding party in Yemen being hit by a drone. Because in Yemen, a wedding party is a bunch of pickup trucks with people hanging out the back holding guns, doing celebratory. So we're already in the point in which algorithms and how we make choices about setting their tolerances are having quite serious real-world impacts. As we have to get our heads around, even non-technical people, as to like, okay, algorithms are going to start governing and defining bits of our life. What choices are we going to make where we set the tolerances? So we can set the tolerance for super efficiency and cash money for the shareholders or whatever, or for the happiness and well-being of people. These are choices that are now going to come into your job very soon. Now I'm going to talk from next 2 slides to the people who work in public services. Have you seen this website? Will a robot take your job? BBC came out a few weeks ago. Did you put your title in? The good news is if you're social workers, it's not as bad as if you're general, but if you're a local government administrative worker, 97% likelihood that your job will be taken over by a robot in the next 20 years, right? You're like 13th out of all of the accountants are going first. That's good news, yeah. Before you are, yeah. So you have a choice, right? Like this is gonna happen. Ooh, can we do public services using the same way that we did it before? No, we don't have enough money. How's our salami slicing going? Is that yielding results? Nope, that's not working anymore. Okay, who's got a better? Hey, I can replace 1,000 of your staff with an algorithm. Oh, right. If you really are a public-minded, vocational public servant, you probably want to be involved in delivering public services after that particular event happens. So it might behoove you to start figuring out how you can be in charge of the algorithm and how you can set it to a good, side of the spectrum or whatever. User needs. We've heard this mentioned a little bit. In the government context, there's a great story. Again, government digital service, new arrival on the scene about 4 or 5 years ago. They started all of their practice on a basic set of principles. They said, these principles are going to govern our behaviors going forward. The first one was start with needs, had a little asterisk. Said, that means the user's needs, not the government's needs. Now, if you're not familiar with this, I think this is the single most tectonic shift in mentality of government. What happened on the back of it, it's kind of arguable whether it's super ideal or not, or whatever, but there are people in all bits of government now, including DWP, right, who maybe have not been like super great at spending taxpayers' money wisely, who are now repeating that, yes, it makes sense that we design services on the basis of what the service user might need, rather than what we, as mandarins, think would be the best idea given our little resource pot thing. I'll show they are the principles, like they're good, they're specific to building digital services, and so that not all of them might be applicable. Designing with data, iterate, then iterate again. This opens the door to the empathy-based practices of user-centered design thinking, or that being used in public service contexts, and also principles around agility, yeah? Testing things discreetly, iterating on them, going for prototypes before you do your massive resource allocation, rather than designing it in-house, putting it all together, rolling out the roadmap, meeting the citizen, figuring out nothing works, and saying, well, we put so much money in, we're going to force this to work somehow. Yeah. Another principle, ecosystemic thinking. A system is defined by where you place the boundary around it, right? So, and in the networked age, these boundaries are, I think, a lot more mobile than we've ever thought of them. So when I was a local government officer, the farthest edge boundary of my system for a while was cultural services. I wasn't even aware of anything going on behind that. All of the decisions that we had to make were in the context of cultural services, right? That was within the lifelong learning something LLL directorate. I knew one guy from there, but I didn't really understand. What I was primarily concerned was my customers, my citizens, people who were interested in my service. So I could draw another system boundary, which was me and them against the rest of the machine. Or if we're going to say, what does a networked council look like? There's a trend now to, there were 5 main directorates when I started working in local government. Maybe there were even 6. I'm seeing a trend around that people are narrowing things down to 3, right? What that tells us is that there's an understanding that the complexity of this kind of way of organizing things isn't effective, but it doesn't let go of the industrial era mental model that we manage these things as machines, right? It doesn't say, how do we reorganize this as a functional network that can chop and change? Maybe someday I needed to do my work as an officer with somebody from the transport section over there because that is what was right for the citizen. Yeah? No, you can't get back into your cultural services box over there and don't get big ideas above your station. So we need to be flexible about how we draw the boundaries. Here we're in Headon Bridge Town Hall. Who are the people who participate within this system? Part of them are in the council. There are people from the council who don't participate in this one. Is the system Calderdale Council, or is the system Calderdale? Right? West Yorkshire. It is West Yorkshire, isn't it? Would have been a bad one. Yeah. Yeah. And so when we think about in systemic terms and stuff, there's a move from thinking of things in terms of egosystems to ecosystems. Ecosystems self-serve particular people within it. It's the people at the top, the 1%, people who have vested interest in their position in the status quo, and the logics that flow from that kind of serve that, whereas ecosystemic thinking is more about this kind of language of co-production and circular economies, things like that. So that's a kind of useful. In terms of personal development, there's a really interesting, again from MIT, idea called presencing, Otto Scharmer's theory U. I will actually add that. I haven't put it on here. I will add that to the slide, so if you look at the link later on, you can see what I'm talking about that. But that's kind of an attempt to chart a journey where you as a person can transition from ego-systemic thinking to ecosystemic thinking. Because of the mention of biomimicry, I threw these slides in here when you mentioned that. How nature does design, right? If you want to understand what are your useful strategies to work in networked environments, well, nature's been practicing for a long time, right? This is a ceramic mug. This is how we make ceramic, or how we solve a particular problem. You take constituent elements, you fire them at I don't know how many thousand degrees, we take a lot of energy to turn it into this shape, and then it can never be anything else again. Yeah? How does nature do that? What's nature's kind of closest approximation of ceramic? What temperature does that get made at? Yeah, ambient seawater temperature. That's the amount of energy you need to take that. Okay, the process is a bit slower. When you're done being a shell, what happens with the materials? They turn back into sand. Yeah? They decompose and feed another bit of the ecosystem. In terms of public services, there's a great idea for biomimicry. It's called the dead tree problem, right? And you can imagine a service that consumes a lot of resources, yet delivers very little value because it was never designed with the user's needs in mind, but is a political favorite within a council. It's like a dead tree in a forest. It consumes inordinate amount of, or dying tree, an inordinate amount of resources to, 3 leaves per year and 1 micro something of oxygen released back into the atmosphere. The minute that thing falls down, it does a couple of things. It opens room in the canopy for new growth. It lets light in for other things. It releases all of the stored energy back into the ecosystem, and it creates a diversified growth spurt for things. So what nature does is throws a gust of wind and says, you're done. Put all of that energy back into the system, and let's have some new stuff come up. There's a cautionary tale in there. Nature is a perfect designer. Given enough time, it irons out all of the impurities. There's only one thing it hasn't quite figured out yet. So either we decide to kind of get a little bit more symbiotically responsible, or we get designed out. And that's billions of years of evidence to demonstrate that. Embrace complexity. Right? You cannot simplify things down to, I did a flow diagram and now we understand everything, so everything's going to be all right. That is just no longer true, right? And this is since the Renaissance. We took science and art and split them apart, and then we started finding out more and more and more and more and more stuff until Now PhDs are kind of, finding a minuscule additional amount of very, very, very interesting information on something that, how does it work with anything else? I think. Recently, we have the complexity science disciplines, which are trying to make sense of this stuff all back together. So we need to recognize that there's like constant atomization, and if you look at a public or any big organization which is made in an industrial mental model mindset, it looks like an atom. How do we separate things out until you do just kind of like this one thing and you don't even have to be a human? Oh, and by the way, we can put a cheap robot in there so we don't need you anymore either. So that was one of the separations that happened, was this Taylorism. Let's put the thinkers and the doers in different places. That was a response. This is 1906, was it? 1909, that he wrote that. That was kind of like a response to, oh, we're putting all these soft, squishy things into like factories full of big and dangerous monsters, and it's not quite working out because occasionally one gets eaten and the humans are slowing the machines down and stuff. So we get this kind of attempt to make sense of that. And then there's the division of cognitive versus manual. In a networked environment, I think we need a better solution to start recombining this, right? Because at the Open Knowledge Festival in Helsinki a few years ago, mind-blowing event, I was going between the open governance track, where people were saying, how do we make open government, to the open hardware track. Philosophically, the whole gang is wrestling with the same issues. The hardware hackers, the open hardware people, are much more practical because they're actually trying to make something and they're thinking with their hands on something. So this idea that you can separate the cognitive from the manual industries, just put robots here, right? And then free the people that you've currently imprisoned in manual slavery conditions and invite them back into this space. And then we can do more interesting things. Cognitive, I have 3 minutes. I'm going to make it. This is a Welsh export. This Cynefin model I commend to you. There's lots of videos and stuff you can look. But it basically says that in these complex environments, we can't have one-size-fits-all approaches to dealing with things. So your issue or problem is either going to be in the simple, complicated, complex, or chaotic domain. And once you've recognized which one of those domains it is, there's a different order of things that you can do. Right? I think in our networked environment and with algorithms coming, everything on that side, basically humans get out of it, right? You're going to get replaced by something more efficient and connected. So these are the kind of disciplines that we need to get much better at. And act, sense, and respond sounds like stuff that goes on in hacker spaces and maker spaces, isn't it? Let's do something. What happened? Oh, that didn't work. Let's respond. Probe, sense, respond gives you emergence, right? Poke the system. This is what's requirement is coming back from us. Let's build a solution on that. From the complex sciences field, we have this idea that it's not so useful to find something wrong and go like, kill, right? Because it's probably going to be resistant to being killed. So there's this idea that you find promising behaviors in your system, or positive deviants, or things that are new but sound like they work, and you generate strategies to amplify that. You give it oxygen. And undesired behaviors, you figure out strategies to dampen them. You don't confront them head on, but say like, okay, what can we do to kind of put that a little bit away into the corner, out of the center spotlight? And that's how you can start shifting behaviors within complex systems. And I think this is my last one, openness, this principle. In networked environments, openness gives you a competitive advantage. Just in terms of network growth, we know that big Uber hubs are built on the idea of, they've got two characteristics. One is growth and one is preferential attachment. Openness gives you the opportunity for preferential attachment. The fundamental prerequisite of openness is your willingness to relinquish some of your existing control. This is, I think, almost, I came across this at a doctoral symposium on openness, right? Like, this isn't just pop culture in the pub. That has been determined that this is the fundamental prerequisite. And finally, you can't just kind of like externalize all of this stuff and hope that other people will do it and you end up living in a happier place. Everybody, all agents within a network and a system have a responsibility to kind of self-diagnose, self-optimize. So to that end, we usually leave this list of questions I think might be useful for the whole event, your whole experience. Go home and spend a few minutes just to yourself contemplating whether anything has shifted internally from all of the stuff that you've been exposed to. It also turns out, if you're of the blogging sort, but lost for inspiration, people have used this as prompts for paragraphs and done blogs. So we give that to you. And that's where you can find all the slides. Only lost 2.